In the Netflix show The Sandman, it follows around Morpheus, who's better known as the Sandman. He controls all of your dreams, but also all of your nightmares. He controls both to make sure they don't envelop us. And when we dream, or we have a nightmare, we go to his realm. While we sit down here on Earth, he's controlling his own realm. He's got siblings like Destiny and Desire, but they control their own realms as well. He's helped by a librarian named Lucia. She's kind of his second in command. And he has a raven named Jessamy. He also utilizes 3 tools. A bag full of sand, a ruby, and this helmet-looking thing that they literally call a helm. He uses all 3 of these anytime he has to go to our world. Doesn't happen often, but every once in a while he has to travel there and deal with something. And in this particular circumstance, he's dealing with a rogue nightmare named Corinthian. It's 1916 England. It's not exactly easy to track somebody down, but for the Sandman, it's no problem. He's able to locate Corinthian pretty quickly, and the problem with Corinthian is he's on a killing spree. He's not just killing these people, though. He's cutting their eyeballs out, vowing to make the world look just like him because he is without eyeballs. As I said, he's a rogue nightmare. He was supposed to stay as such, but he decided to stay in the real world and kill human beings. That's not going to fly with the Sandman. But right as he's about to destroy Corinthian, he gets pulled away by something else. Because not too far away, there's a guy named Roderick Burgess who's a wannabe sorcerer. He's pretty rich and has one son named Alex, and his other son passed away in the war. And unfortunately for Alex, Burgess makes it known that his older son was his pride and joy. He's got a huge house with a lot of followers that call themselves the Order of the Ancient Mysteries. One day he gets a visit from a guy named Dr. Hathaway who has an old spell book. And Hathaway has shown up because his own son has passed away. He was hoping that Burgess can use this spell book and bring his son back. In order to do that, Burgess is going to have to capture the Angel of Death. But instead of capturing Death, which is one of Dream's siblings, he captures Dream. When Dream shows up, he's knocked out in a binding circle, and Alex starts taking his 3 tools. Burgess himself rips off the cape, and that's when Jessamy starts attacking him. Everybody's pretty confused. They don't really know what to do because they thought they were getting the Angel of Death, and this clearly isn't it. But for the time being, he can't move if he's in that binding circle. So they're just kind of content with keeping him until they figure out what to do with him. The thing is, once he does recover, there's nothing that Dream can do because he's in this binding circle. And what pisses him off the most is he got trapped by a guy that doesn't even know what he did. By taking away Dream from his realm, it's negatively affecting the real world because he can't police the dreams or the nightmares. It's resulting in thousands and thousands of people dying. They called it the sleepy sickness, and it affected everywhere. People just didn't wake up. But Burgess is still reeling from the fact that he doesn't know what he has, and that's when he gets a visit from Corinthian. He explains that what he has in the basement is a member of the family from Desire, Destiny, Despair, the Grim Reaper. They're all connected. And the one in his basement is Dream. By taking the 3 tools, it'll lend him a sliver of Dream's power. He can extend his lifespan and he can manipulate others with them. But Corinthian tells him you have to make sure he never escapes. The binding circle isn't going to be enough. You have to construct a sphere of glass inside the circle. That will contain his physical manifestation. No one must be allowed to fall asleep in his presence, or he will escape in their dreams, which will help him escape in the real world. He tells Burgess all of this because he wants to survive, and he knows that if Dream ever gets out, he won't. So right after Corinthian visits him, Burgess heads downstairs in the basement and tells Dream that he knows who he is, but he didn't intend to trap him. He wanted the Angel of Death because he wants his son back. If Dream can do that, then he'll let him go. But Dream doesn't say anything. So Burgess asks, well, what can you offer me? If I let you go, you've got to give me something in return. But once again, Dream just stays silent. 10 years later, he was still stuck in that basement. It was good for Burgess. The 3 tools had brought him prosperity, youth. I mean, things for the Order couldn't be better. For the rest of the world, though, the sleepy sickness continued to wreak havoc. It's around this time where Burgess is introduced to Ethel Cripps. Cripps and Burgess start a relationship, and she seems to be into him for his power, because it can't be for looks. I mean, there's only so much those tools can do. He still looks like a pop-up. Alex is still living in the house, and he's still an outsider, never accepted by his father, continuously trying to get in his good graces. And one of the ways he's going to try to do that is by shooting Jessamy. For 10 years, his dad has been trying to get rid of that damn bird, but he can't. It just stays near the house, following him around. And that's because for 10 years, Jessame has been trying to figure out how to free Dream. But as Jessame comes up with a new plan and the bird is pecking at the glass trying to free Dream, she gets shot by Alex. And even though he did what his father wanted, it's still not good enough because Burgess yells at him for shooting at the glass because it could have shattered. Alex just can't win. He's not the only one who's going through a tough time, though. Ethel ends up getting pregnant, but Roderick doesn't want her to keep it. So in the middle of the night, she leaves the house. But she doesn't leave empty-handed. She takes all of Dream's tools. She also takes the spell book and 200K, because Ethel Cripps ain't no fool. Roderick wants all of it back. He needs help. He sends his men after her, but he knows that might be a fool's errand. So he goes in the basement and asks for Dream's help. He figures that maybe because she stole Dreams' tools, he'll want to find her. Dream, however, remains silent, and that infuriates Roderick, who starts banging on the glass, and Alex tries to come and calm him down, but it results in Roderick screaming at Alex. The two get into a fight, and Roderick ends up bumping his head, bleeding out, and dying. With his father dead, he could free Dream, but he doesn't. Continuing to live in the house and managing things. 9 months after that, Ethel Cripps gave birth to a son named John. Years go by, and before you know it, it's a century. Alex continued to live there with his boyfriend, Paul, and Dream continued to live in the basement. Alex wanted to let him out, but Dream never assured him that he wouldn't harm him if he did so. Because of that, Alex had to keep him in there. On one such day, when Alex is talking to Dream, telling him how much he did want to let him out, Paul tells Alex that's enough, and he starts escorting him upstairs via Alex's wheelchair. But when he does it, he ends up breaking the binding circle, just by a little bit, but that's all that Dream needed. It seems like Paul realized what he was doing, because he looks down at the ground and then looks back at Dream, but he continues to go forward without saying anything. With the binding circle broken, Dream is able to manipulate one of the guards into shooting the glass and freeing him. Alex ends up finding out that Dream escaped in his dreams, which quickly become a nightmare. And Dream's payback is to give Alex eternal sleep. He then finally returns to his realm, and there's Lucienne waiting for him. But the realm is not how he left it. With him gone, it doesn't look like a realm of dreams at all. It looks way more like a nightmare. And Dream has a lot of work to do. In episode 2, Lucienne starts explaining how things started deteriorating shortly after he vanished. She tried to keep a record of everything, but next thing you know, the entire library disappeared and she hasn't been able to find it. Dream tries to rebuild everything using his powers, but without his 3 tools, he can't. He's struggling. He knows he needs to get them back. And when Lucienne says, why don't you just ask one of your siblings, he snaps back that they have their own problems to deal with, their own realms. And it's not lost on him of the fact that they knew where he was this entire time, and they did nothing. They just sat back and let it happen. So no, he's not too keen on asking his siblings for help. He's got to do this himself. He knows what he has to do. He has to summon the Fates. It's 3 women who speak in riddles, but they know everything. They're going to help him, at the very least, locate his tools. The problem is, at the moment, he doesn't have the power to summon them. What he needs is something that he created. Something that remains intact, because if it's intact, it has some fragment of his power within it. He can absorb whatever it is and get a little bit of his power back to summon the Fates. And there is one such thing. It's a gargoyle named Gregory. Gregory is the pet of both Cain and Abel, the brothers. They live on the outskirts of the Dream Realm, and they are shocked when Dream shows back up, but it's a good shock. They're happy to see him again. That quickly vanishes, though, when he explains that for the sake of the dreaming, he has to take back Gregory. Taking back Gregory is like taking back one of their pets. They don't want to do it. Cain especially gets nasty with Dream, saying that you forgot us. I mean, you were gone for a century. You have no idea what we went through. You have no idea what we've lost. But Dream tells him, I didn't come here to ask you. I came here to ask Gregory. He walks up, asks the gargoyle, and the gargoyle says okay. Both Cain and Abel say their goodbyes to Gregory, and then he's reabsorbed into Morpheus. As soon as Morpheus leaves, Cain kills Abel, which is a trend. He does this a lot. Abel ends up coming back to life. It's an adorable love-hate relationship. With Gregory reabsorbed, Dream heads to the waters, where he's going to try to locate the Fates. But the Fates aren't just going to help him for the sake of helping him. He has to give them something. Normally, he would just conjure something himself, but there's nothing from the dreaming left, which means he's going to have to find something from the dreams of others. So he dives in. What he settles on is crossroads, gallows, and a snake. He also grabs an egg that's right next to the snake, but he's going to use that for later. He's not giving that to the fates. He then summons the 3 women, and they show up. They accept his gifts, but they tell him that he's going to have 3 questions. That is it. They will give him an answer, and then he has to move on. The first question he has is about the leather pouch that was filled with sand. They tell him that it was last sold in London and purchased by a magic user called Joanna Constantine. That name's familiar to Dream because he used to know a Constantine, but that was 300 years ago. Maybe it's a relative. He's not quite sure. He then asks the woman if she still has the sand, but that's not part of the gig. He already asked his question. He has to move on. His second question has to do with his helm and what happened to it. They tell him that it was traded away to a demon for the amulet of protection. But when he asked them which demon was it traded to, they refused to ask because he already asked his one question. He's got to move on. His final question is, who holds the ruby now? And they tell him that it was passed from a mother to a son. But when he asks where are they now, they yell at him that he's asked his 3 questions. That's it. As Lucian said, they speak in riddles. After talking to the fates, he decides to drop off that egg at Cain and Abel's. Abel wakes up from the latest killing by his brother, and he sees the egg, and he feels like his brother left it there, but when he walks back in the house, he finds out that his brother didn't leave it there. He never would. It must have been from Dream. The egg hatches, and it's a baby gargoyle, and at first, they're a little annoyed by this. You're just going to swap out Gregory for this? But it doesn't take more than a few seconds for them to start falling in love with the little guy. They end up getting into a fight, though, about the naming of the gargoyle, and Cain kills Abel again. As for Dream, the only real lead that he has is about his sand. It was sold in London, and at least he has a name. When he has it back, he's going to seek out his helm, which he knows is in hell, based on the amulet. Lucian begs him before he goes to take a raven because Dream always travels with a raven, but Dream says no. Jessime was the last. He then tells her that if Constantine is anything like her ancestors, she'll serve him well enough. I mean, after all, she is only human. But one place he probably should have checked is with Ethel Cripps. You can't blame the guy, though. He had no idea Ethel Cripps existed. But she is flourishing, living in Buffalo, New York, and she looks damn good for her age. She's also going under an alias, and she's done everything in her power to make it look like Ethel Cripps never existed. It made it really difficult for Corinthian to locate her, but eventually he does. He tells her that that thing that was in Roderick Burgess's basement, well, it's out. And now it's coming for the both of them. Ethel can't quite figure out why it would come for her, and Corinthian explains it's coming for you because you stole his tools. He wants them back. Ethel says to him, well, I'm guessing you want them too, and he says, no, they're made of the same thing I am. What I want is to teach you how to use them, so we can make him go away for good. She tells Corinthian, I don't have them, and he says, yeah, that's too bad. I wonder if your son knows where they are. How is he doing nowadays? I'm going to ask you one last time, for your son's sake, where are the tools? She once again says, I don't have them, and he can't believe that because of how well she's doing, which she's surprised at how sexist that statement is. Woman can only be successful via magic. She goes on to explain that when she left Roderick, she traded the sand and the helm for her life in America. As for the ruby, her son John took the ruby from her. And then the ruby took John, because even though it has the power to make dreams come true, it also has the power to make nightmares come true as well. As for the location now, Ethel doesn't know, and she doesn't want to know. But Corinthian doesn't believe her, and he's got a way to find out if she's lying or not. That's by cutting out her eyes. It helps him see exactly what she's seen her entire life. So he pulls out the dagger, but she's not scared at all, because she has the amulet of protection, the thing that she traded the helm for. And when she takes it out, it makes Corinthian disintegrate. And it seems like it's pretty painful. He ends up getting transported right back to the place he was created, in the dream realm. And there's Lucian waiting for him. When Corinthian arrives, he asks Lucian, where is Dream? And when he finds out he's away, he knows that it's because he's looking for his tools. But Corinthian has no plans on staying in the realm. He wants to go back to the waking world. Even after Lucian explains that dreams and nightmares do not belong in the waking world, Corinthian feels like he fits right in. Lucian can't believe that Corinthian has no loyalty to Dream, but Corinthian says, why would I? He doesn't care about you or me. He only cares about himself, his kingdom. We can have all that, because I'm leaving and I'm never coming back. Lucien tells him he's going to come for you, but Corinthian says if he does, he's not coming back here either. As for Ethel, she went to go visit her son John, who is in a mental institution, and a very heavily armed mental institution at that. They definitely don't have the best relationship, but she came there to talk about the ruby. In episode 3, Ethel and John continue their conversation about the ruby, and he finds it really interesting that she's bringing this up now, because she never used to talk about it. So he asks what changed, and she tells him that the Sandman is back, and he's going to be looking for it. And John's the only person who knows where it is, but he doesn't believe any of it's real. He's heard this lie before from his mother, and his mother is a perpetual liar, so he doesn't really buy into the fact that now all of a sudden he's going to be coming back looking for his things. This starts a bit of fighting between the two, where he reveals to his mother that he knows who his father is. And the story that his mother always told him was that his father died before he was born. With nothing but time on his hands, he decided to do a little research into the fact, and he found that Roderick Burgess had a mistress. Her name was Ethel Cripps. Thus, his father must be Roderick Burgess. This opens her up to telling him the true story of what happened between them and Roderick Burgess. When Roderick's men were coming after her, she hid the ruby and traded the helm for the amulet of protection, which right away John recognizes. That's what's been able to keep her girlish figure all these years. But in order to protect her son, she needs the ruby back. And he tells her that he rewired it. It only works for him now. He tells her, if you don't believe me, you can try using it yourself, but it won't work. And she explains, I don't want to use it. I want to give it back to him. But he doesn't want to jump to giving away a jewel that makes dreams come true. The more they talk, though, the more that he realizes that all of his mother's actions were done so to keep them alive. And he's willing to tell her where the ruby is as long as she brings it back to him. But she doesn't want to do that, because the last time he had the ruby, a lot of people died. The way John looks at it, though, he was acting in self-defense because those people were trying to take the ruby from him. This is what probably ended him up in a maximum security mental institution. John continues to pitch his mother on the fact that he needs the ruby to protect her, but she explains that she doesn't need the ruby. She has the amulet of protection. She gets so frustrated after a while, she just takes the amulet off and says, all right, fine, you know what, here, have it. I'm going to give this to you, and you don't need the ruby. You can give it back to him, and he won't come after you. As soon as she hands it over, though, she immediately starts aging. I mean, she is technically like 140 years old, so it catches up to her pretty quickly. Her and John have to say their goodbyes, and within a couple minutes, she's dead. One of the guards in the institution comes in and sees what happened and immediately thinks that John must have done something to her. But when he pulls a gun on John, John uses that amulet of protection. The guard completely disintegrates. As John makes his way through the hospital, more guards disintegrate. He just casually walks out of the building, and there's Corinthian waiting for him. And he immediately starts befriending him. As for Morpheus, he's busy tracking down Joanna Constantine. He finds her in the middle of the night walking into a church. He tells her that they have business to talk about, but she blows him off because she doesn't recognize him. She heads on into the chapel, and she's been called there because she needs to perform an exorcist. But when Joanna finds out the target of the exorcism, she has no interest because it's the princess from the royal family. She showed up about an hour ago begging this priestess to marry her to a football player, but the priestess is convinced that she's actually been overtaken by a demon. It takes a little bit of convincing, but eventually Joanna agrees to perform the exorcism for a very high fee. She then puts on the priestly garments and she pretends to be the priest that's going to marry the princess to the footballer. But as she's going through the ritual and saying the spell to disperse the demon, she finds out that it isn't the princess who's possessed, it's actually the athlete. And this is a tough day for the princess because she was in love. And now the guy she's in love with is dead because he was overtaken by a demon. The demon is big, intimidating, yet Joanna isn't scared of him. She asks him, what's your name? And the demon doesn't want to tell her. And that's when Morpheus tells her his name is Agalaeth. Because Morpheus and Agalaeth know each other from way back. And when Agalaeth refers to Dream as Morpheus, that shocks Joanna. She always thought the Sandman was nothing more than a myth, and yet here he is in front of her. In fact, he was outside talking to her, and she blew him off. Agalaeth starts mentioning how he didn't really recognize Morpheus without his helm. And Agalaeth knows that it's in hell because it was traded to a demon, but the thing is, Agalaeth knows which demon it is. But before he can tell Morpheus, Joanna completes the exorcism, sending the demon back to hell. This really infuriates Morpheus, because that could have made the job a whole lot easier. But after he calms down a bit, he walks outside and tells Joanna that he showed up because he's looking for the pouch full of sand. She tells him that she bought it from an estate sale a while back. She couldn't even get the drawstrings open, and she doesn't know where it is. It could be anywhere. When he tells her that they need to find it, she doesn't really get the severity of the situation. So he tells her that if he doesn't find it, then his realm will cease to exist, dreams will cease to exist. It's a slippery slope, and it doesn't end well for mankind. She tells him that she'll help him, but she'll help him the next day, and she works alone. She doesn't need him or his raven following her around, and he didn't bring a raven. But when he looks to his left, there's one staring at him. He walks up to it and asks, "All right, what is your name?" And it turns out the raven speaks fluent English, and his name is Matthew. He was sent by Lucienne, and he was told that Morpheus wanted nothing to do with him, which is true. But he also knows that Morpheus needs him, like for this very moment, as Joanna gets away. It's really late at night. They know that she's going home to bed, so finding her isn't really going to be an issue for the Sandman. But Matthew wants to help. That's what his purpose is now. Turns out he used to be a human, and not a real great one. He died and he was reborn into this raven. Lucienne sent him to help Morpheus out, so that's what he's planning on doing, even though he doesn't really know who Morpheus is. But he's looking at this role as a raven as a second chance. So Morpheus agrees to let Matthew tag along. It doesn't take long for him to locate Joanna, and she's having a dream, but it's more like a nightmare. And Morpheus realizes that this dream is also a memory. It's a memory of Joanna trying to dispel a demon who her satanic boyfriend just summoned as he was, quote, fooling around with magic. As she was getting rid of the demon, it resulted in a little girl named Astrid dying. Joanna always blamed herself. When Joanna wakes up from this nightmare, there's Morpheus standing there. This event is the reason why Joanna hasn't had a good night's sleep in a long time. Every time she does, this memory/dream/nightmare just keeps reoccurring. But now that Morpheus is in her living room, she might as well look for the sand. She does so in her office, which is cluttered with a bunch of junk. And she asks him what's so important about this sand, and he explains that it's a part of him, which begs the question how he lost it, and he tells her it was stolen from me by a magic user named Burgess. She then realizes that the person standing in front of her was the legend of Roderick Burgess, because growing up, everybody was told that Burgess had the devil himself locked up in his basement. But now she realizes it wasn't the devil, it was the Sandman. He doesn't confirm it, but he all but confirms it. He then notices that there's a picture of Joanna and another woman. And what stands out about this picture is the fact that Joanna actually looks happy in it. She then realizes where the sand is. It's at this woman's apartment. She was seeing this woman for a decent bit, and she decided to stay with her. But to the woman, it looked like she was moving in. Things were moving too fast for Joanna, and one day she took a job, and 6 months later, she still hasn't returned. She doesn't even know if the woman still lives in the same building. I mean, she really ghosted her. Because of that, they head over, but Joanna is insistent that she's heading in alone. And Morpheus is insistent that he's not waiting a long time. He'll give her a couple minutes, but after that, he's heading in himself. Joanna enters the apartment, and her ex-girlfriend is thrilled to see her. Doesn't take long for them to rekindle the relationship, and next thing you know, they're making out. But that make-out session ends abruptly. It's as if the ex-girlfriend suddenly remembered she got ghosted after years, and she starts calling Joanna selfish, and it takes Joanna really off guard. But then her girlfriend starts disappearing into sand, and Joanna realizes that this was all a dream. She wakes up, and she's in the same apartment, but her girlfriend is nowhere to be found. And that's because her girlfriend is bedridden, clutching the bag of sand. Morpheus explains that that sand was never meant for human consumption, and what happens when you abuse it is you slowly deteriorate over time. Joanna's ex-girlfriend is dying. I mean, she's on death's door. The only thing keeping her alive is the sand. Joanna begs Dream to do something about it, but there's nothing he really can do other than give her a nice dream. So that's what he does, putting her in a very nice dreamlike state. She then dies in her sleep. Joanna and Morpheus then say their goodbyes, and Joanna tells Matthew, keep an eye on him. Right before she does walk away, Morpheus tells her, by the way, that dream/nightmare you deal with, you're not going to have to deal with it anymore. When she's out of earshot, Matthew asks Dream, all right, where to next? and he tells him, we're going to go to hell. At first, Dream wanted to send Matthew back to the dream realm, but he realized he might actually have use for him, so he's bringing him along. And Matthew was excited until he found out where they were going. But he doesn't really have any choice in the matter, and Dream and Matthew are off to the underworld. In episode 4, Morpheus and Matthew end up in hell. And it lives up to the hype, that's for sure. They can't just waltz right in there, though. They have to be invited through the gates. So Morpheus basically knocks on the door, and a demon shows up, and he tells the guy he's there to see Lucifer. He's the king of dreams. This isn't just a quick walk, though. This demon really has to escort him through the landscape of hell to Lucifer. On the way, Morpheus tells Matthew that he's known Lucifer for a while now. In fact, he knew Lucifer back when she was an angel. She was actually the most beautiful, wisest, and most powerful of all the angels. Lucifer is way more powerful than him. They start walking up this narrow mountain, and Dream tells the demon we're going a completely different way, but the demon brought him here for a reason. And that's when he hears a familiar voice say, Dream Lord? It is you. It's a woman named Nada, and she recognizes Dream, but he looks completely different. She starts telling him how she dreamed of this day and how she knew he would come, and only his forgiveness can free her. And that's all she wants, is to be freed. And he tells her, it's been 10,000 years, and I still love you, but I haven't forgiven you. And then he walks away, leaving her there. The demon continues escorting Morpheus and Matthew to Lucifer, and eventually curiosity gets the best of Matthew, and he asks, all right, who was that person? And Dream tells him, she was the ruler of a tribe that called themselves the First People. We were in love, but she defied me, so I put her here. It's a topic that Morpheus doesn't really want to get into too much. He then finally sees it over the horizon, and it's the castle that Lucifer is sitting in. When he finally makes his way inside into the top, there she is, Lucifer, standing in front of him with black angel's wings, wearing all white. He gets right to the point, telling her that his helm was stolen from him, and he believes that one of her demons has it. So she says, no problem, which demon is it? But he admits that's the thing I don't know. So she calls up all the demons, and they show up at the bottom of the castle, and there are tons of them. But he doesn't need to go one by one. Now that he has his sand, the helm will come to him. Using the power of the sand, all of a sudden the person with the helm appears. And the person that currently has the helm is someone named Choronzon. He's a Duke of Hell, and he has no interest in giving it up. As he tells Dream, I made a trade, a fair one at that. So it forces Dream to challenge Choronzon. And that means that if Dream wins, he gets the helm back. But if he loses, he'll serve as Choronzon's slave in hell for eternity. It's not exactly a good deal here, but Dream doesn't really have a choice. Dream is going to fight for himself, but Choronzon chooses Lucifer to represent him. So the two square off, but this isn't going to be just a normal fight. They basically say what they are, and then the other person has to one-up them. But they end up feeling real pain from this. So Lucifer starts out, and she says, I am a dire wolf. And then Dream responds with, I'm a hunter. And when the hunter shoots the dire wolf, Lucifer feels it. Her next move is to be a serpent, who bites at the horse. And the poison from the snake ends up being seen on Morpheus's body. But Morpheus, in turn, becomes a hawk, whose talons rip the snake apart. In response to the bird, Lucifer becomes the butcher bacterium, one that destroys all worm life, and that really cripples Dream. He responds to it by saying, I am a world. Horrible response, because she responds with, I am an all-exploding, planet-cremating supernova. At this point, Dream is clinging to life, and he says, I am a universe. To which she calmly responds with, well, then I am anti-life. And Dream's battery is at about 1%. He's not in a good spot. Matthew, who doesn't want to be stuck in hell for the rest of his life, starts imploring Dream to respond with something. After all, dreams don't die. And this little pep talk ends up working because Dream gives the final death nail, responding with, I am hope. And that's something that Lucifer just can't beat. She ends up forcing Choronzon to give the helm back, and Choronzon ends up getting killed. But embarrassing Lucifer the way that he just did in her own home, that doesn't really sit well with Lucifer. She gives back the helm, but she starts threatening not to let him leave because, after all, he doesn't have any power there. And he says, I have plenty of power. I'm Dreams. I mean, what power would hell have if those here in prison couldn't dream of heaven? It's a really good point. Lucifer doesn't really have a response, but she does tell Morpheus before he leaves, one day, we will destroy you. But as he points out, not today, Satan. He then exits hell with the helm, and thanks to the helm, he's able to locate the ruby. Using the sand, him and Matthew find it pretty quickly, but as soon as he picks it up, he realizes that it's been tinkered by somebody. And all of a sudden, the ruby blasts him back and knocks him out. Now, he's obviously not the only one going after this thing, so is John. And after giving him his coat, Corinthian just left. So John is all by himself in Buffalo, New York, and he looks kind of lost. This woman named Rosemary almost hits him with her car, and she gets out to check on him, and she starts asking him if he needs a ride anywhere. Even though John looks completely lost, says that he doesn't really have a home, and he's wearing pajamas and slippers, she lets him in her car, because apparently she really wants to be the subject of a new Netflix docuseries. He asks her to drive him to a place called Mayhew. That's where he has the ruby. So he hops in the car, and it's just Rosemary and her dog and John chilling in the back seat. They start passing the time by talking about life, and he mentions how his mother just died, but he's not really broken up about it because she wasn't a good person. Rosemary can commiserate because her mother isn't a great person either. But slowly, John turns into a pretty chatty Cathy and reveals to Rosemary that he killed people. But he starts trying to plead his case to Rosemary that it all had to do with this ruby, and when people tried to take it from him, he just had to act accordingly. But the revelation that she's got a murderer in her backseat makes Rosemary very uncomfortable. She realizes she needs to do something about it. At one point, she tries to grab her phone and covertly call 911, but that doesn't work. So she stops off at a gas station, claiming that she needs to fill up, but she makes the mistake of asking John if he wants anything from inside. And he says, yeah, I've been in a psychiatric hospital for 30 years. I want something other than what they've been giving me. So he goes into the store with Rosemary. She tells him, grab anything you like, but when she goes up to the counter and she tells the clerk, call 911 for me, this guy's an escaped mental patient who's murdered people, John overhears the conversation. He doesn't react with violence, just telling Rosemary, we gotta go, but when the clerk pulls a gun on him, he ends up using the amulet of protection, which results in the clerk dying. At this point, she's terrified. She asks him, are you going to hurt me? And he says, well, not if you're taking me to my ruby. Then I have no reason to hurt you. A little while later, they show up at the storage locker where the ruby is located. And instead of getting the hell out of there, Rosemary ends up staying. John casually walks inside, picks up the ruby, and walks out. He doesn't even notice that Dream or Matthew are sitting right there. He is pretty surprised when he walks outside, though, and Rosemary's car is still sitting in the rain. She tells him, I know I'm going to regret this, but do you need a ride somewhere? And he kind of chuckles and says, you really want me to get back in that truck? And she just tells him, I want to go home. He starts telling her how she's a good person, but unfortunately, good people seldom survive in this world. And she thinks that John's going to harm her, but instead, he does the exact opposite. He takes off the amulet of protection, and he gives it to her, telling her to wear it, because from now on, no one will be able to hurt her. He then takes off, with plans on using the ruby to, quote, save the world. In episode 5, after leaving Rosemary, John goes to a local diner. Now, you've basically got 6 characters in this episode. Bet, the waitress, who is upbeat, energetic, but also looks pretty damn tired. Her big dream, though, is to become a successful writer. She thought she was going to have more time to write when her son went off to college, but it really hasn't been the case. She has a big crush on the owner/cook, Marsh, but he's pretty short with her anytime she talks to him. And she's had Marsh over a couple of times to eat dinner, but nothing's really come of the relationship. Then you've got Judy. She just broke up with her girlfriend, Donna. Maybe. They had a big fight, and Judy hasn't heard from Donna since. So she's kind of freaking out a little bit, really stressed out. You've got Mark. He's young, interviewing at Vanguard, and he's pretty stressed out as well because he's just nervous about his job interview. And then finally, you have Gary and his wife, Kate, who is the CEO of Vanguard. Gary works for her. They both were regulars at the diner, and they were introduced by Bet. So she looks at them like they're her crowning achievement. They're celebrating their 5-year wedding anniversary that day, and while they seem happy on the outside, you can tell that their relationship is a little bit fractured. Like when she orders 2 spinach salads for the table, but Gary actually wants a burger. And he knows that he's going to get crap from her if he ends up ordering what he wants. John watches everybody interact with each other, and all he sees is a bunch of lies. He wants to fix the world, which means getting rid of the lies. So he starts using the ruby to do that. Next thing you know, the couple starts fighting. Gary starts pushing back on the fact that he has no authority, and he gets pushed around by Kate all the damn time. Then you've got Judy, who was pretty rude to Mark from the get-go, but Mark was nice enough. Now with the power of the ruby, he pushes back a little bit. Like when Judy mentions how she can't get in touch with her girlfriend, Mark says that's because she doesn't want to talk to you. It pisses off Judy so much that she tries to leave the diner, but she can't. She just turns right back around, which is a trend. Everyone is basically trapped in the diner. Even Gary and his wife, when they get up to leave, they just stop at the door, turn around, and act like they're entering it for the first time. Probably the most powerful truth moment is with Marsh and Bet. Bet finally finds out why Marsh hasn't really returned her romantic advances. She invites Marsh over for dinner and then says maybe afterwards we can get in my bed. But that's when he says that he doesn't want to do that. Because the only reason he comes over for dinner is he wants somebody else cooking for him for once. And then he waits for her to fall asleep on the couch and he goes upstairs and has sex with her son, who, by the way, is 21. So it's not like this is a pedophile thing. But that comes as a really big surprise to Bet. Then John turns it up a notch. Gary overhears the commotion in the kitchen, so he heads in there and he starts talking to Marsh. Turns out Gary isn't the most loyal husband in the world because his wife frustrates the hell out of him. And as he tells Marsh, every once in a while, you just kind of want it sucked, if you know what I'm saying. Yeah, Marsh definitely knows what you're saying, Gary, and he is more than willing. So Marsh ends up going down on Gary. Well, on the outside in the diner, Bet had introduced Mark to the CEO of Vanguard. She decided to just hold the interview right then and there. But the interview wasn't a normal interview. It goes into who Mark is, and then it turns into flirtation, and then it turns into them having full-on sex in the diner. And then finally, Judy and Bet hooked up. But then suddenly all of this turns really dark when Gary comes out and sees Mark hooking up with his wife. He just completely forgets the fact that he got sucked off by a guy a mere 10 seconds ago. He goes into a fit of rage and starts attacking Mark, and Mark ends up stabbing him in the neck out of self-defense. And this isn't the only violence that's occurring, because John, with the help of the ruby, isn't just affecting the diner, he's affecting the world. The newscast says there's a fit of violence going on worldwide. And that's when Bet realizes that everything had changed when John entered the diner. She thought when he said he wanted to change the world, he was just kind of saying that. But now she sees that he is in fact changing the world, but it's not for the better. And John points out, all I did was take away the lies. This is who you people really are. When Mark points out that he didn't want to kill Gary, John says, well, yeah, you did. Because if you didn't, you would have died. For you a world where you didn't have to suffer in it. But it appears that you actually enjoy your suffering. And then with the power of the ruby, they all start self-mutilation. And when it ends, everyone's dead except for Bet. And she asks John, why did you do this? How is this making the world better? And he tells her that you're looking at this with your eyes. You need to close your eyes and then you'll see it. So she does that. She stabs herself in the eyes, but she starts telling John exactly what she sees, saying, you come from dust. You walk the dust. You go back to dust. But it's not really Judy talking. It's actually the fates. And one of the things that they tell him is, you have stolen the power of dreams, and you will take all of it. In fact, you will crush the Dream Lord's life in your hands. And that is when, through the door, Dream walks in. Dream tells him that he has to give back the ruby, because all of this madness that he started, the ruby wasn't made for that. You need to return it to me so I can repair all the damage you've done. John doesn't want to give it up, though, and Morpheus explains to him that it's actually harming him, and it's harming the world. John thinks of it like he is revealing the truth, but Dream explains, no, the truth is that all of these people have dreams. Like Bet had dreams of being a writer. Gary had dreams of being something and proving his father wrong. You took that from them. That ruby is hurting you. It's got too much of my power in it, and it stole even more when I tried to use it. And that's when John says, well, if I steal the rest of your powers, then I become the King of Dreams. And Dream explains that if he's going to rob a Dream Lord of his powers, he's going to do it in his realm, the realm of dreams. So he puts John in there, and he puts him in a really tough situation. At first, he's about to make out with his mother back at the Burgess household, but then he's back in the insane asylum, and his mother is choking him. Although when John realizes none of this is real, it's all fake, Suddenly, he's in Dream's castle, and with the power of the ruby, he starts destroying it. When Morpheus eventually shows up, he starts destroying him as well. The ruby starts sucking up Morpheus until there's nothing left. And at that moment, John thinks he'd won. So he decides to crush the ruby. But in reality, he lost. Because all of that was a dream, except for the fact that he crushed the ruby. That actually happened. And when he destroyed the ruby, he released the power inside of it. So Morpheus has all of his powers back. He could kill John, but instead, he puts him back in the mental institution, and he has him just sleep. When he walks out of the diner, he's greeted by Matthew, and the world is pretty messed up. I mean, it looks like the purge took place. And that's because it basically did. Thanks to the ruby's power, John ended up opening up a bunch of wounds, showing people the truth. But the truth has consequences, and the consequences were a bunch of violence and a bunch of new wounds. Now, Dream has to start rebuilding the world, making it as it was. He'll start doing most of the heavy lifting the next day, but for the time being, he tells Matthew, at least tonight, the world will sleep well. But Dream wasn't the only one overhearing this conversation, because so was his sibling, Desire. In episode 6, after putting the world back together, at least for the time being, Dream falls into a little bit of a depression. He heads to the park where he's visited by his sister, the Angel of Death. He told her that after he was captured, all he could think about was vengeance, and when he got it, it wasn't as satisfying as he thought. Meanwhile, his kingdom was falling apart. His tools were lost, so he had to go on a journey to find them, and he did. And now, he's more powerful than he's been in ages. And yet, he's not happy, because he enjoyed all of those quests, but now that they're over, he's kind of sad. But if he was looking for sympathy from his sister, he doesn't get it, because she tells him, feeling sorry for yourself because your little game is over? That's pathetic. Get some balls and go find a new one. I mean, hell, you're as bad as Desire. No, actually, you're worse. She also rips into him because she feels like he's self-centered. But she has a job to do. So her and Dreams take off from the park and they start making their way around the city as she starts taking souls away from this world and sending them to hers. On the way, she lets them know that they did have one family dinner when he was away. Desire was in high spirits, but he figures that was probably because he wasn't there. Desire and Dreams don't really get along. Dreams asks if there's been any word from the prodigal, but Death says, no, still missing. They reach the first appointment of the day, and it's this old violinist. Death lets him say a prayer, and then she takes him. They start heading to the second appointment, and on the way, Dream tells his sister that when he was captured, they weren't actually looking for him. They were looking for her. And she looks at him and says, I know. They then reach the next appointment, and it's this guy on the beach. He drowns in the water, so Death ends up taking him, way before he's ready. Death and Dreams then start heading to the third appointment, and they start talking about how difficult their jobs are, each thinking the other's job is more difficult. Because Dreams could never do what Death does, and Death couldn't even think of doing what Dreams does, but they both like their jobs. But the third appointment is the most painful one of them all, because it's a baby. An innocent baby who's no more than 6 months old. But as Dream and Death continue to make their way through the city, he just can't figure out why people fear death so much. Everybody knows it's coming, yet nobody wants to go with her, which makes her job difficult, but it also makes her so good at her job because she's there for all these people, comforting them the entire way. As they wrap up the day, she tells them that it used to be difficult because she used to look at this as she was doing all of it alone. But then she realized she wasn't alone. She had these people that she was dealing with. Maybe it'll help Dream if he looks at his job the same way, because he's not alone. Because at the end of the day, the whole family, Death, Dreams, Despair, Desire, they're there to serve the people. It isn't about quests or finding a purpose outside of the function, because their purpose is their function. They're there for the people. And what she realized through all of this was that she needed those people as much as they needed her. It's one of the reasons why Death shockingly has a sunny disposition. Dream ends up thanking his little sister for this reminder, and then the two go their separate ways. Because Dream had a meeting to get to. You see, way back in 1389, Dream and Death ended up going to a tavern. They overheard a guy named Hob talking a big game about how he wasn't scared of death, and how he just planned on not dying. It was that simple. Death and Dreams, overhearing this, thought this was pretty funny, and they actually had the power to make this happen. So Dreams walked up to him and said, if you don't want to die, fine, but you'll meet me back here in 100 years. And he figured in 100 years, Hob would be begging for death. But in 1489, he wasn't. I mean, first of all, he couldn't figure out how he was alive, and he couldn't figure out how Dreams was alive because Dreams never revealed his true identity to this guy. And he's a little concerned that he made a bargain with the devil, but Dreams assures him, I'm not the devil. I'm just interested in your experience. You live your life as you choose, and then on this day, in 100 years, we'll meet. That is, if you still want to live. And Hob absolutely wants to continue to live because he loves seeing the advances in technology, like these fancy things called tissues. When they meet again in 1589, Hob's doing great. He's even been knighted. He's been making money all over the place, and what he's been doing is going away for a while and coming back as his, quote, son. But the best thing to happen to him in 100 years is he met a woman named Eleanor, and they had a child named Robin. It's safe to say that Hob is absolutely loving life, and he can't wait to see what the next 100 years holds. Dream does overhear a loud, boisterous guy in the corner, and he asks Hob, who is that guy? And Hob tells him, oh, it's some playwright named Bill Shakespeare. He's not very good, though. But Dream likes his enthusiasm, so he gets up from the table, and he makes a deal with William Shakespeare. And that's why everybody knows the name Billy Shakes. Fast forward 100 years, though, and things have taken a turn for the worst. Hob has lost all of his money. He's down on his luck. He's looked at as a peasant. And this is finally the moment that Morpheus thinks Hob is going to want out. But instead, no. The exact opposite. Hob is convinced that the next 100 years will bring more fortune and prosperity, and he decides to live. And his gamble pays off because by 1789, things have turned around for him. He meets up with Dream and he gives him the update. He's making a lot of his money in the slave trade, and Dream doesn't agree with that. He thinks he should find another line of work because it's not right to enslave a man. Hob kind of looks at him cross-eyed and says, wait, now you're giving me advice on how to live my life? But Dream says, well, the choice is yours, but yeah, I am giving you advice. You shouldn't be doing that. And Hob does say that he'll reconsider the job. But then suddenly they're approached in the tavern by a woman and two guards. The woman is Lady Joanna Constantine. She tells them that there's always been this legend that the devil and a Jewish man meet in this tavern every 100 years. I mean, clearly she's wrong because neither of these guys are Jewish or the devil. But she wants the same immortality that they have, and Dream says no. So she tries to sick her guards on them, but Hob jumps up and attacks them, thinking that he has to come to Dream's aid. And that's when Joanna has a knife to his throat. But Dream pulls out some sand, and next thing you know, Joanna is having a complete nightmare. Hob asks Dream, what did you do to her? And Morpheus tells him she has old ghosts. I just showed them to her. The two men then leave the pub, and in 1889, they meet back up. The pub where they meet at is frequented by a hooker named Lushing Lou. At least, that's what they call her. Her other nickname is less flattering. It's the hospital, because that's where she sends most guys. Gonorrhea ain't fun, folks. Not that I know from experience. But when Hob mentions that he doesn't actually know her real name, Dream tells him it's Louise Baldwin. Her father was in the British Army and her cousin raped her, impregnated, and then deserted her. Hob looks at him astonished and asks, how did you know all that? You knew Lady Joanna, now you know Lushing Lou. You know everyone, don't you? Morpheus doesn't answer the question, but he does tell him, I saw Lady Joanna again. She undertook a task for me and succeeded admirably. The conversation then segues into why the two meet there every 100 years. And Hob's theory is that Morpheus needs a friend. He thinks he's lonely, and Morpheus gets really offended by that. He looks at him and says, don't dare suggest that I need your companionship. You know what? I guess we don't need to meet, and then I'll prove you wrong. Morpheus goes to leave the bar, and as he's walking away, Hob is yelling at him, I'll be here in 100 years' time, and if you're here too, it's because we're friends. But in 1989, Hob shows up at the bar. Morpheus does not. And it's not like Morpheus is intentionally standing him up. He was sitting in Burgess's basement, stuck. So by the time 2022 hits, he's 33 years late. And the bar that they frequented was bought out, and it's now an abandoned building. But Morpheus notices that there's a sign for a new bar. And when he heads there, there's Hob running the books because he bought it. When Hob looks up, he gives Morpheus a big, giant smile. And he tells him, you're late. Morpheus chuckles and says, it seems I owe you an apology. It's rude to keep friends waiting. The two friends then sit down and start catching up. But in the Desire realm, Desire is talking to another one of his siblings. telling whomever it is, maybe Despair, that their plan had failed. But that's okay, because they have a new one. In episode 7, Desire calls up Despair and says, "I've got news." And Despair immediately thinks it's the prodigal has returned, but Desire says, "Oh, no, this isn't about him. It's about dreams. I've got a new plan." But as Despair points out, your plans haven't really worked yet. But Desire is convinced that this plan will work, because there is something called a dream vortex, and it's the first one in a long time. The vortex's name is Rose Walker, and she has no idea that she actually is a vortex. But as Desire says, she's already doing what a vortex is supposed to do, bringing everything and everyone to her, including Morpheus. And rumors of a vortex have reached the dream realm. Everyone's kind of talking about it. Lucienne is trying to conduct a census, but every person she talks to brings up the vortex, and Lucienne plays it off like it's nothing more than a rumor. When she's done conducting the census, she goes to Morpheus and gives him the update, and most of it's to be expected, but there are 3 big pieces that are missing. The first is Galt. Galt is a nightmarish shape changer. The second missing entity is the Corinthian. And the third is something called Fiddler's Green, which is really peculiar to both Lucienne and Morpheus. The first 2 aren't shocking, this one is, because Fiddler's Green has always been really reliable. Lucienne brings up the rumor that as everybody talking, and Morpheus tells her that's not a rumor, that's true. Lucienne urges Morpheus to go after it, but he says, "I can't. We can't go after any mortal who isn't a threat. And maybe she can help us out. She's a vortex, so sooner or later she's going to draw one of those 3 to her." Lucienne thinks that's really risky because Rose could destroy the waking and the dreaming, but Morpheus tells her, "I'm watching her." The problem is he's only watching her in her sleep. So Lucienne proposes that they have someone go and watch her when she's awake, and Matthew volunteers. Lucienne fills Matthew in on what to look for. She tells him that if the vortex manifests, she's going to do so in her dreams. But that's going to reflect her waking life. So he just has to look out for any signs of shock or trauma. That's pretty vague, but Matthew has his orders and he flies off. Meanwhile, Rose Walker is already going through trauma. Her mother just died and she's been trying to track down her little brother Jed, who she was separated from when her parents got divorced. Jed stayed in Florida, she moved up to New Jersey, but she eventually found out that Jed was placed in foster care. And since then, she's had no luck. It's also proved to be really expensive and she doesn't have a job. So she is beyond stressed out. She does have some support though. Her 2 friends, Lyda and Carl, are there for emotional support. But she does get a break. There's a foundation in England that's willing to pay her $250 a day for 7 days to fly her out and do a family history interview. That's it. It's easy money. So Carl house sits for her while Lyda and Rose head on off to England. It's worth mentioning, by the way, that Rose is actually friends with Judy, the same Judy who died in the diner, but we don't actually know if Rose is aware of that. While flying over, the 2 women get some sleep, and Lyda's dead husband visits her in her dreams. She's been trying to put on a good face since her husband died, but it's been really, really tough for her. The next day, they arrive in Sussex, and they go to the Foundation. They're greeted by the lawyer, Mr. Holdaway, and then he escorts them in the building and over to his client. When they enter the room, there's an old woman, and her name is Unity Kincaid. She explains to both Rose and Lyda that when she was younger, she fell ill with something called encephalitis lethargica. Basically, it's what the people that didn't die from the lack of dreams had. They just fell asleep. Unity stayed asleep until about 8 months ago. But in her dreams, she had this glorious life. She took over her father's business, she met a man with golden eyes, and they had a baby together. But then she woke up, and she found out that none of it was real, except for the baby. Because when she was asleep in the hospital, she had a baby girl, and that baby was Rose's mother. Rose gives Unity a giant hug, and the 2 start getting caught up. After a little while, though, Rose decides to go looking for Lyda, but she hears somebody calling her name. And when she opens a door, there are the Fates. They tell her, "You're at a crossroads, and we can only caution you. We can't protect you. Beware of dreams and houses, and we must warn you against the Corinthian." Suddenly, though, the light turns on, and all of it's gone. Lyda's standing there, and it was as if Rose was daydreaming. Rose goes and talks to Unity, and Unity is adamant that she wants to find Jed. Problem is, Rose explains that she doesn't have any money, and for Unity, that's not an issue, because the family comes from a lot of money. They own a sugar company. So on Unity's dime, Rose and Lyda are going to head down to Cape Kennedy, Florida, and try to locate Jed. But before she leaves, Unity takes off a ring and hands it to Rose and says, "My parents gave this to me a long time ago. It's yours now." It's a gold amulet, which is really surprising to Rose because she had a dream about an amulet. And who the hell dreams about an amulet? Both Rose and Lyda head off to Cape Kennedy, Florida, and they're going to stay at a B&B. The owner is a guy named Hal, and he told Rose his entire life story, so Rose, in turn, told him his on the phone when she made the reservation. But he also is a gossip, so he told the entire B&B about the new guests. That includes two of their neighbors, Ken and Barbie, who are aware that that name is cringeworthy. But they seem really nice, and they invite both Rose and Lyda out that night. The whole B&B is going. Rose and Lyda then meet their other neighbors, Chantel and Zelda, who are a little peculiar. Hal tells Rose that he doesn't know if they're girlfriends, wives, mother-daughter, but he actually likes the mystery. And then the final resident is a guy named Gilbert, but they don't meet him. They put their stuff down and they head over to social services. But social services will not give the location of Jed. Their stance is pretty simple. Jed has parents, legally, and Rose isn't it. Even though she's his sister, she's not bound by law to know exactly where he's located. Rose pleads with the woman, explaining that Jed is the only family that she has left, and all she wants to do is see him and talk to him. But the social services woman says, "What happens if I tell you where your brother is, and you find out that he doesn't want to go with you, that he's comfortable where he is? What then? Or what about if he tells you that he wants to live with you? Are you ready for that burden at the age of 21? Are you really prepared to raise a 12-year-old boy by yourself?" It's not like the social services woman is completely cold, though. She does tell Rose that the foster parents were friends of her dad's. They took Jed in, they applied to be his foster parents, and now they're getting $800 a month, so Jed is doing fine. It's not really the news Rose wanted, but for the moment, she just has to accept it. Her and Lyda head back to the B&B, and Ken, Barbie, Zelda, and Chantel are about to actually leave for the cabaret, and it's the cabaret that Hal performs in. Even though they're a little jet-lagged, Rose and Lyda could just use a little bit of a break, so they head there. And they're having a great time. Hal's really good. But during the performance, Rose gets a phone call from Unity, so she steps out in an alley to take it. She can't hear Unity, so she's trying to move around, and that's when she's approached by two guys who are looking to mug her. Luckily, though, Rose is saved by a Good Samaritan who takes both guys out. And it turns out the Good Samaritan is actually Gilbert, who is heading to the performance late to go see Hal. But Gilbert decides to walk Rose home instead of going into the cabaret. And everything that Rose has done since she's entered Cape Kennedy has been seen by Matthew. And after the mugging, he heads back to the dream realm and he alerts Lucienne on what he saw. Lucienne, though, is wondering what the hell she's doing in Florida, and Matthew explains, well, she's looking for her missing brother. And that's news to Lucienne. She had no idea that Jed Walker was missing. But sure enough, she can't find him in her records either. And the big deal is the fact that he's not just missing from the waking world, he's also missing from the dreaming world as well. Lucienne goes to alert Morpheus about it, but Morpheus is dealing with the same problem. He can't locate Jed Walker either. And that is really peculiar because all humans are connected to the world of dreaming. In fact, they spend a third of their life there. And breaking that connection would require the power and the knowledge to do so. Lucienne tells Morpheus that the last nightmare that Jed Walker had before he completely disappeared was of Galt. And there's a chance that Galt severed him from the dreaming world. And Galt probably did it because Jed isn't just any child, he's Rose Walker's brother. But at that moment, somebody else enters the room, and it's Rose Walker. Somehow, she ended up in the dream world on her own, and she's got some questions about where her brother is. And we're not sure if it's a dream or reality, but we do get a look at maybe what happened to Jed. He was in the road, and he flagged down the car of a woman he called Aunt Clarice. She's concerned about why Jed is in the middle of the road, and he tells her that Uncle Barnaby said he was going to lock him in the cellar, so he decided to run. He starts begging Clarice to get in the car and just take off, go anywhere. But then they're caught by Barnaby. Both Jed and Clarice are terrified of this guy. And Barnaby makes Jed come back to the house with him. But he doesn't put him in the passenger seat. He makes him get in the trunk. While Rose was looking for Jed, Corinthian was looking for Rose. He stopped by her apartment, but all he found was Carl. and Carl liked him some Corinthian, so the two slept together. But as Corinthian is getting ready to leave, he sees a story on the internet, and it's a copycat murder. Corinthian's pretty well known. In the true crime world, he is a big celebrity. But now, he's got somebody taking credit for his kills? That doesn't sit well with him. And the copycat murders are being done by 3 true crime enthusiasts who want to get the Corinthian's attention because they want him to be the keynote speaker at their murder event. So as they're sitting at a diner table talking about their recent kills, the Corinthian walks up to him, and they are starstruck. They explain to him that they want him to be the keynote guest at their, quote, annual gathering of collectors, people who share the hobby of murder. He actually chuckles at them when they call him the current Corinthian, because they think that there have been multiple ones. They don't realize that this is the only Corinthian because he looks so young. Corinthian loves the idea, but he has to bring a guest, and the guest is Rose Walker. In episode 8, both Lucienne and Dreams are pretty surprised that Rose Walker is standing in front of them. But they also battle on whether or not she should stay. Lucienne doesn't think she belongs there, but Dreams wants her to stay and wants to kind of keep a close eye on her. He explains to her that she's in the dream realm, which means she's currently sleeping. He also explains to her that she's a dream vortex. Once every few thousand years, a mortal is born with a dreaming ability so powerful she can travel through the dreams of others. That's probably how she got to his throne room. And he tells her, if you can find me through the dreaming, you can find your brother. But he's pretty sure that Jed is with Galt, one of his missing nightmares. Rose isn't quite sure on how to dream hop, and Morpheus tells her, for now, just keep looking for your brother in the waking world. Matthew is going to watch over you. And when he's with you, I'm with you. Then tonight, when you sleep, you and I will go and search for the missing dream Galt and your brother together. And at the moment, Galt has him hidden in their old childhood home. Since she's a shapeshifter, she's shapeshifted into the body of their mother. And she's got Jed pretending to be a superhero, ironically enough called the Sandman. Think of her as kind of his Alfred to Batman. She's not doing him any harm whatsoever. She's making him feel good about himself. And that's because in reality, his life sucks. He's banished to the basement in Barnaby and Clarice's house where he sleeps around rats. But the good news for Jed is Rose is now on the case. And with the help of Dreams, at least she has a little bit of a lead. When she wakes up that morning, she calls up Unity, gives her an update on what's going on, and tells her, I'm going to stay here a little bit longer and continue to search for my brother. Unity is more than okay with that. But then Rose hears a voice in the background, and it sounds like Unity is hosting company. And Unity tells Rose, believe it or not, a journalist is here and wants to talk to me about the sleep sickness. But it's not a journalist. It's Corinthian. And as soon as Rose gets off the phone with Unity, he's able to find out through Unity that Rose is currently in Florida. And the fact that a journalist would want to speak to Unity Kincaid is very understandable. Because as Morpheus and Lucienne are doing some research as to why Galt would target Jed and not Rose, they find out that Unity Kincaid was literally the only person to survive this sleepy sickness. And she just so happened to wake up the moment that Morpheus escaped the basement. Back with Rose, she follows Morpheus's edict and decides to keep looking for her brother. One of the ways she's going to do that is she's simply going to put up missing posters. Everybody at the B&B is really supportive of this. They all take a bunch of posters and plan on putting them up themselves. Meanwhile, Rose and Hal canvass the area putting them up, while Lyda heads to social services to see if she can get any information, because the first time they went there, Rose was a little rude. And Lyda does have some luck. Not at getting any information on where Jed is, but at the very least, getting the woman to do a check-in on Jed to make sure he's okay. As she heads over to Jed's current whereabouts, Rose and Hal got better acquainted. She tells Hal that when her mom got a job in New Jersey, her dad cut off all ties. No more alimony, no more child support, and they couldn't even talk to Jed. She really beats herself up over the fact that it took this long for her to try to find her brother. In turn, Hal fills her in on his life story. He moved to New York looking to become a big Broadway actor. He was planning on then moving into film and television, but he found out that that was pretty hard to do. So when his grandmother died and left him the house, he decided to move back to Cape Kennedy and open it up as a B&B. But while they get acquainted, they have no idea that the Corinthian is following them. Not acting just yet, but keeping tabs on him. So is Matthew, though. And when Rose spots him, she walks over, and she can't believe that he's real. He just reassures her that night when she sleeps, her and Morpheus will go searching for her brother, and that if she needs him, he's going to be around. But while her and the whole B&B are looking for Jed is getting a visit from the woman from social services. Barnaby was none too pleased when the woman called up scheduling a visit. He wanted to cancel it, but his wife convinced him that would look really fishy. What it boils down to is the fact that Barnaby doesn't want to lose the $800 a month that comes with taking care of Jed. But he also loathes Jed. So right before the visit, he told him that he better be on his best behavior or else he'll break every bone in his body. When the woman finally does visit, it looks as if it's one big happy family. They try to send Jed off to his room so they can talk about more adult things that would bore the hell out of a child. But right before he does, he gives the woman a giant hug, but he slips her a note in her purse. The problem is she never gets it because Barnaby and Clarice saw it. And before she left, they grabbed it back. And the note simply said, "Please help me." Because of it, Barnaby ends up punishing Jed by beating on him. So Rose can't find Jed soon enough. But after canvassing the area the entire day, she has no more leads. Nobody's called. When she gets back to the B&B, she ends up telling Hal, I kind of like it here. Maybe I'll move back. And he can't figure out why. And she tells him that she was kind of inspired by his story about going to New York and coming back. She had dreams of going to grad school and becoming a writer, but his life seems pretty good here. And that's when he tells her about the reality of the situation. He hates it there. He loves his tenants, but it's not like this is what he dreamed of, cleaning up after Barbie and Ken. And if Broadway called tomorrow, he would leave and he would never think about these people ever again. He then implores her to go to grad school and become a writer. Do what she originally dreamed of. She then heads upstairs, turns in for the night, and within about 5 minutes, she is knocked out and she's in the dream world. The first person's dream she enters is Hal's, although that dream quickly turns into a nightmare. She runs out of that and runs right into Lyda's dream. And that's really awkward because Lyda is having sex with her dead husband. She decides to give those two a little bit of privacy. And she walks into Chantel's dream, where she sees Morpheus. So she follows him outside into either Barbie or Ken's dream, one or the other. And he explains to her that she's drawing the dreams of others to her. She needs to be careful not to lose herself into them, but by doing this, she will find Jed. She then notices one of her missing posters. The words are all jumbled on it, but she follows it, and she's transported to another world. There's a woman named Miss Barbara talking about the journey of the porpentine. There's this weird animal that looks like it's out of Narnia. And that's when Dream explains that a dream vortex has the ability to dream of some worlds or destroy others. They keep walking through this world and they end up in a graveyard, and that's when they realize that they are in Zelda's dream. Although Zelda is a little girl, and Morpheus explains, we're in here because Zelda feels comfortable in this graveyard. So where did you guys feel comfortable when you were a child? And that's when it dawns on Rose, we felt comfortable in our own childhood home. So that's where they head next. But when they arrive there, Galt sees them on the security camera footage, and she knows the jig is up. She knows that Morpheus probably isn't there for Jed, Morpheus is there for her, not realizing that Morpheus and Rose are there for them both. She tries to protect Jed by telling him not to go out, but she's made him think he's a superhero all this time, so he does it anyway. He tries to stick up to the Sandman, but Galt touches Jed on the shoulder and says, he's not here for you, he's here for me. Rose is shocked because standing in front of her is her mother. She doesn't realize that it's actually not. And Morpheus has to stop her and say, that's not your mother. Jed then realizes that the girl next to Morpheus is his sister, and he runs up and gives her a giant hug. Rose starts imploring Jed to tell her where he's going to be when he wakes up, explaining that all of this is a dream. As she's doing that, Morpheus is making Galt show her true identity. The only information, though, that Jed gives her is the name Barnaby, Clarice, and the fact that they're in, quote, homeland. Other than that, the dream has to end. They need to wake up. And it's unfortunate for Rose because she didn't want to wake up. She didn't get the answer she was looking for. She's not the only one that doesn't want to wake up, though. Lyda definitely doesn't want to wake up. She's really enjoying her time with her husband. I mean, the sex and all that is cool. But then suddenly she realizes in her dream world that she's pregnant with a baby. The most shocking thing, though, is that when she wakes up, she actually is pregnant. Just like Unity Kincaid. It transferred over from the dream world to the real one. She would like to go help out Rose because Doing a quick Google search, Rose was able to find a Barnaby and a Clarice who lived in Homeland. So she has the address, but the shock of actually being like 3 months pregnant is a little much for her at the time, so she stays back at the B&B. So Rose heads there by herself. But when she gets there, the police have taped off the location and they're taking out bodies. Right away, Rose starts panicking, thinking that Jed is one of those bodies. And when she asks a police officer, the cop tells her that no little boy was in the room. It's just a man and a woman. Rose is unaware of the fact that the Corinthian visited the social services worker, killed her, found out the location of Jed, went to the house, killed Barnaby and Clarice, and told Jed, your sister sent me. Come with me. So Jed is with the Corinthian. And even though he's being really nice to Jed, he's not safe. And that was Galt's big fear. When she gets back to the dream realm, her and Morpheus start arguing about the fact that he demanded she come back home. She was trying to explain to Morpheus that this boy's life was terrible, so she tried to give him an escape, a good one. But as Morpheus points out, that's not your purpose. Galt makes the case that her purpose can change, but Morpheus doesn't agree with it, and he is the boss. Galt gets a little too mouthy with Morpheus, and he banishes her to a few thousand years in the darkness. As soon as Galt was out of the room, Morpheus knows that Lucienne felt the punishment was a little unjust. And in fact, Lucienne does, but she tries to explain to Morpheus that before he made her the librarian, she was something else. And the fact is, everybody changes. Morpheus looks at her and says, I realize that in my absence, you were the one making decisions here, and trust me, I am grateful to you. But I'm back now, so you may return to the library. And that is a giant slap in the face to Lucienne. In episode 9, when Rose gets back to the B&B, she explains to Lyda everything that happened with finding Jed in her dream and that leading to finding Jed in real life. She says, I know it sounds crazy, but Lyda turns around and says, no, that's not crazy. I'm pregnant with my dead husband's baby. That's crazy. Rose tries her best to explain to Lyda that she's a dream vortex, what that means, and she vows to fix all of this, but Lyda doesn't want it fixed. She wants the baby. She also tells Rose that she's seriously considering her husband's offer to just live in the dream world with him. She doesn't really feel like she has a life in the real world, and the dream world is way more enticing. Matthew watched this whole conversation go down, and he's been watching everything. But somebody getting pregnant from a dream, he has to report that back. But he does so initially to Lucienne. And Lucienne knows what's going on. Rose is weakening the walls between the realms, the waking world and the dream world. But then she remembers what Morpheus said, and she says, you know what? This is none of my business. I'm, quote, just a librarian. She explains to Matthew that Morpheus has kind of always been this way, like a jerk, and that he's determined to deal with the vortex and the missing dreams by himself. So from now on, give any news you have directly to him. Before Matthew leaves, he does tell Lucienne, you really should make up with Morpheus. Now is not the time to be fighting. As Matthew is giving this update to Lucienne, Rose is getting an important phone call from the Corinthian. She doesn't know it's the Corinthian, though. She just thinks it's a good Samaritan who found her brother. And the Corinthian tells her, we're currently at the Royal Empire Hotel. Come meet us. The Royal Empire is a few hours away, but that is also the location of the Serial Killers Convention. Although, to the general public, it's just a serial convention. Right as she's about to leave, she gets a knock at the door, and it's Gilbert, who tells her that they're running low on the missing posters. And Rose excitedly tells him, we don't need him anymore. I got a phone call, and he's in Georgia. I'm headed there now. Gilbert's pretty excited about this and says, you gotta let me accompany you. Takes a little bit of convincing, but Rose is all for it. A little bit of a road trip. Rose and Gilbert then hop in the car on a mission to go get Jed. Meanwhile, the Corinthian and Jed check into the hotel. As the Corinthian is at the front desk, he's approached by the same people that organized the event, and they give him all of his packet and his name tag. But when they notice that he's with Jed, they tell him, you may want him to stay clear of the convention area. So the Corinthian puts Jed in Rose's room and then heads down for the opening ceremony. The guy organizing the event gets up there, thanks everybody for coming, and lays out the ground rules. The first is no real names. You're only using code names here. The second is nobody kills during the convention. Wait till after that's over. And then he explains to everybody that the original speaker couldn't make it, but they got a replacement, and that is the Corinthian. And everybody is shocked. Everyone's thrilled. They give him a standing ovation. There's then a little bit of a lull, and they wait for cocktail hour. Meanwhile, Gilbert and Rose Walker are pretty close to the hotel. As Rose and Gilbert are getting better acquainted, she gets a phone call from Unity. She gives Unity an update, and Unity in turn is going to send her tickets to get both her and Jed over so that she can meet Jed. She's also going to talk to her lawyer, Mr. Holdaway, about Rose becoming Jed's legal guardian. But when she gets off the phone, she starts telling Gilbert about her fears, like mainly what happens if Jed doesn't like her, or even worse, what happens if she doesn't like him. And Gilbert kind of laughs and says, I'm impressed. I mean, you allowed yourself to be happy for about a minute there before inventing some new problem for yourself. And the thing is, Rose is just nervous. But they have about an hour before the drive is over, and she ends up dozing off a little bit, going into the dream realm. And she goes into Lyda's dream, which has been great. Her and her husband have been banging each other's brains out, although there was a slight disturbance. They felt the ground shake, but when they went outside, they saw nothing. And that's because they were just too far away. There was indeed an earthquake going on in the dream realm, but they're ignorant to all of it. When Rose does run into Lyda in her dream, Lyda has gotten more pregnant real fast. She looks like she's due. To Dream World Lyda, though, it's been months. To Rose and the rest of reality, it's been all of 2 hours. But time just moves differently in the dream realm. As the two women make their way to the house that Lyda's dead husband created for her, they find out that Hector, the husband, isn't the only person there. So is Dreams. Because when the earthquake took place, Lucienne brought it to the attention of Morpheus. She was convinced that it had to do something with the vortex. And when Morpheus and Matthew went to go check it out, it turned out to be that Lucienne was correct. Morpheus knows he can't sit back and do nothing. At this point, even though she doesn't mean to, Rose is putting cracks in the foundation of the worlds. So after introducing himself to Lyda, he tells her that her husband has to leave. A ghost cannot escape his fate by hiding in the dreaming world. Just like how a living human being can't escape her grief by hiding out in the dreaming world. Hector belongs with the dead, Lyda belongs with the living. It's just that simple. Hector seems to understand. Lyda does not. So Hector goes over and consoles his wife, but Dream takes him away. He then makes the situation so much worse by telling Lyda that her baby is hers for now. Because the baby was conceived in the dream world, it actually belongs to him. And one day, he's going to come wanting it. And that does not sit well with Rose at all. She starts protesting it, but then all of a sudden, they're both transferred from Lyda's dream to Morpheus' throne room. Morpheus is really surprised that Rose was able to follow him there, and she continues protesting, saying, "You killed my friend in front of his wife, and now you're threatening to take her baby?" And he looks at her and says, "This is happening because of you. A vortex gathering strength can weaken the walls between dreams." They start arguing with Rose telling him, "I don't want you near my friends," and him trying to talk some sense into her, but she cuts him off and tells him, "You said a vortex can create universes or destroy them. So I suggest you leave my universe alone." And then she wakes up. But she wakes up to her cell phone buzzing, and Lyda's on the other end crying because Morpheus took Hector. Everything else is okay. She's still pregnant. She's just dealing with the trauma. Rose starts trying to reassure that nothing will happen to the baby, but they arrive at the hotel, so she's got to hop off the phone. And inside the hotel is cocktail hour, where Corinthian is the main attraction. Everybody's walking up to him, including a big fan who goes by the name The Boogeyman. The guy is clearly starstruck, and luckily for Corinthian, the organizers of the event walk up, and they interrupt the conversation, which forces the Boogeyman to step over to the side. The head of the event says, "Oh, I see you've met the Boogeyman." And Corinthian says, "Yeah, I have. And that isn't the Boogeyman. The Boogeyman's dead. He drowned in Louisiana 3 years ago. I don't know who the hell that guy is." The organizers don't take too kindly to the fact that a stranger has infiltrated their group, so they tell Corinthian, "We'll take care of this." I mean, this group is super selective, to the point where when Rose and Gilbert walk in, they get stopped. They won't let Gilbert or Rose go any further because they're not guests of the convention. But that doesn't stop Rose from grabbing a couple name tags and sneaking in. They go their separate ways, both looking for Jed with the agreement that they'll meet back in the lobby in 15 minutes. But upon searching through the convention, Gilbert realizes just what kind of serial convention it is. He gets really concerned, especially when he sees Corinthian. And Corinthian makes eye contact with him, and it seems like the two know each other. But Corinthian doesn't say anything because he's talking to the organizers of the event who have found out who this, quote, boogeyman really is. He's just a fanboy. They have to do something about this guy, so they agree to kill him. Corinthian then notices Gilbert once again as Gilbert is leaving a message for Rose at the front desk, but he gets interrupted by this fake boogeyman, so he decides to strike, luring him down into the basement where he, along with the other organizers, are going to kill him. As they're walking away, Rose walks up to the front desk, and she is shocked to learn that she has a room there. The concierge then gives the message to Rose that Gilbert left, which is, "I'm very sorry, I have to go home." That's it. So Rose is alone at the hotel. But Gilbert didn't travel back to the B&B. Gilbert traveled back to his legitimate home, because Gilbert is Fiddler's Green. He traveled back to the dream realm. He interrupts a conversation between Morpheus and Lucienne where Morpheus is apologizing for acting like an asshole. And he, in turn, apologizes to Morpheus for leaving. And when Morpheus asks, why? I mean, you were the heart of the dream world. Fiddler's Green says, no, I wasn't. You were. And you left. I was just curious what life as a human was like, and turns out it contains a substance that I never could have even imagined. But I've returned because the Corinthian is down in the human world murdering people. Looks like he's built up this cult of worshippers who just kill for pleasure. But more importantly, he's endangering the life of a friend named Rose Walker. And this is shocking to Morpheus, who can't believe that the Corinthian has found her. Morpheus then takes off to go find her, and Lucienne fills Fiddler's Green on the fact that Rose Walker is actually a vortex. And Fiddler's Green says, oh my god, what have I done? That means he's going to have to kill her. But for the time being, Rose Walker is safe. Corinthian doesn't even know she's in the building, because the Corinthian was busy killing this fake boogeyman. But he was caught by Jed, who just traveled around the hotel and accidentally walked in on it. Jed ran out and ran into the arms unknowingly of another serial killer, this one who hunts on children. And this one, pretending to take Jed to safety, started escorting him to his room, and that's where Rose just happened to see him. When Jed ran over to Rose to give her a hug, this sicko grabbed Jed and said, no, he's mine. Jed ended up punching him in the stomach, and Rose and Jed take off running from this guy, until finally they're cornered. They have nowhere to go, but they're saved when the Corinthian ends up killing them. And in the season finale, episode 10 picks up right where episode 9 left off, with Corinthian standing there having just killed the child predator. He tells both Rose and Jed, I'm trying to save your life from Morpheus. To Jed, that name means nothing. Obviously, Rose knows who he is. And that's when Rose realizes that he is one of the missing nightmares. And when she says it out loud, he admits to her that he knew the whole time she was the vortex. She tells him, if you know that, then you know he's watching me. And Corinthian chuckles and said, you think he's watching you to protect you? No. He's watching you because the minute you fall asleep, he's going to kill you. That's why you need me protecting you. Because you could become the center of the dreaming. That would render him powerless and me free. A knock at the door interrupts the conversation, and it's one of the women who organized the event telling him that he has to go on stage in 15 minutes to make the keynote address. When Corinthian walks back in the room, Rose tells him, I'm taking my brother and we're going home. And he tells her that that's fine, but he plays out a scenario that when she leaves, she's going to be followed by Dreams Raven everywhere. She's actually safer in the room. Makes a lot of sense to Rose, so she ends up staying. Corinthian then heads downstairs and addresses the entire crowd of serial killers. Midway through his speech, he asks all of the guests to close their eyes, and that's when Morpheus shows up and puts everybody to sleep. This way, he can address Corinthian one-on-one. Morpheus tells Corinthian, I'm so disappointed in you. I mean, you were my masterpiece. But now look at you. You've walked this earth for centuries, infecting others with this joy of death you have. Corinthian pulls out a knife and says, all right, I'm telling you right now, I'm not going willingly. And Morpheus laughs at him, saying, you're going to pull a knife on a dream? All right, let's see how that plays out. But when Morpheus puts his hand up to kind of destroy Corinthian as he did with Galt, Corinthian stabs him in the hand. It hurts Morpheus, but the bigger issue is he can't figure out how Corinthian did it. And Corinthian tells him, I've got Rose Walker getting stronger every single day. And every second she's alive, you end up getting weaker. She's bringing the walls down in between the sleepers' minds. And now they're all dreaming the same dream. A dream that I inspired. And he's right. Because upstairs, Rhodes and Jed had slipped into sleep. And they went right into Corinthian's nightmare, where they think that they're leaving the hotel, But when they get downstairs, they see these serial killers chopping up bodies, and they're surrounded. And when Corinthian starts bragging about the fact that Rose Walker is currently in his nightmare, Morpheus says, well, then she's not beyond my reach. But as Corinthian points out, the issue is she knows you want to kill her. That doesn't stop Morpheus from going to visit her, and he shows up out of nowhere and tells Rose, you need to wake up. But Corinthian had followed Morpheus into Rose's dream, and he tells her, don't listen to that guy. So you just got a battle of Corinthian versus Morpheus on whether or not Rose should wake up or not. During this squabble, Rose confronts Morpheus on the fact that he's planning on killing her. And he says, well, let me explain to you why. When a vortex brings down the walls between dreams, she creates a single volatile dream that will collapse in upon itself and take the waking world with it. In layman's terms, the world, everything, everyone she knows, it's all going to die. Rose can't take the squabbling between these two, so she says, all right, enough. If I'm as powerful as you guys say I am, I'll find my own way. But in the meantime, the walls go back up. And then she wakes up. She is safe in her bed, but Morpheus and Corinthian are downstairs. Corinthian once again hammers home the point that he's not planning on going back to the dreaming, but Morpheus tells him, oh, yeah, you're not going back there. I'm going to uncreate you. And then he puts up his hand, and within a matter of seconds, Corinthian is nothing more than a bunch of dust and one tiny, tiny skull. He then heads into the conference room where all the serial killers are still sleeping, and he reams them out for being, quote, collectors. He tells them that the dream that they were living in is over. And he's talking about all those daydreams that they have, where they are right, it's done. From this moment on, they're going to know how selfish and monstrous they truly are. They're going to feel the pain of those who they've slaughtered. And they'll also feel the grief of those that mourn those people. In a nutshell, they're going to have no reason to live, and some of them realize that pretty quickly, and they kill themselves. The convention just empties out into the street. Some people call the police right away and confess to murders. Others just kind of drive off into oblivion. Rose and Jed leave the convention, but they get in their car and they head back to Florida. On the drive, Rose fills Jed in on what happened to their mother, how much she loved him, how much she kept looking for him. But she also fills him in on the fact that they have a great-grandmother who wants to meet him. But their trip gets a little detoured when Lyda calls and tells them that she's in the hospital and she's about to go into labor. Lyda's not alone. The entire B&B is there supporting her. But instead of going to the B&B, Rose and Jed are going to head to the hospital to be with Rose's friend. When they get to the hospital, Rose introduces Jed to the entire B&B. But there is one person missing, and that's Gilbert. Rose still doesn't know where he is. They don't really focus too much on it because, Lyda is currently going through labor. But when Rose gets a little bit of free time, she calls up Unity to let her know that she currently has Jed. But she also asks Unity, hypothetically, of course, that if something were to happen to her, would Jed be able to come live with Unity? And Unity says, of course. I was actually going to suggest that both you and Jed come live with me anyway. This is a big relief for Rose. She thanks Unity, and then she gets off the phone. A nurse then comes and finds Rose because Lyda is asking for her. Rose fills Lyda in on everything, and her big fear is that when she falls asleep that night, Morpheus is going to come and kill her. Lyda, being a good friend trying to make Rose feel better, says, well, if all of this is true and you have the power to destroy the world, then you also have the power to destroy him. But Rose tells her, I don't want to destroy him. I don't want any of this. But Lyda hammers home the point that when Rose goes to sleep that night, she has to find Morpheus and end this. So that night when Rose dreams, she finds herself first in Hal's dream, but then she finds herself in a meadow with the entire B&B, all going through their dreams. And with everybody in this field not knowing what's going on, a true vortex starts. Rose can't stop it. She just starts apologizing to them, but one by one, it starts sucking them up. But the worst part about all of this is Jed shows up in his Sandman superhero costume, thinking that he can save the day, but he can't. He gets sucked up by the vortex. And when it looks like Rose is going to face the same fate as the rest, she suddenly finds herself in a winter setting, and there's Morpheus. He tells her that already she's created a great deal of damage. The good news is it's nothing he can't repair. When Rose frantically asks, what happened to my friends, Morpheus tells her they're asleep in their beds. But they're not safe. No one is. Not until the vortex is dead. As these two chatted up, back at the library in the dream realm, as Lucienne is doing her job, Unity Kincaid shows up. And this is truly a first. Unity tells Lucienne, I'm just looking for a book, and the good news is she came to the right place. The library has every book ever written, and even books that haven't been written yet. But Unity is looking for one particular book. She wants to read about her unlived life, the life that she would have had she not fallen asleep. And then she finds it. But when Lucienne sees the book she picked up, she puts two and two together and realizes that Unity is Rose Walker's grandmother. So Unity starts reading the book on her unlived life, while her granddaughter is trying to get pitched on the idea of dying. But that's when Gilbert shows up. Fiddler's Green wants to sacrifice himself so that his friend can live. But as Morpheus tells him, I'm sorry, that's not possible. And all of this is pretty surprising to Rose, who thought that Gilbert was just a guy named Gilbert. They have to explain to her, no. Gilbert was actually one of the missing pieces of the dream realm. His true identity isn't actually a person, it's a place called Fiddler's Green. They then start talking about the whole purpose of why a vortex even exists if it has to die. Gilbert gives an unbelievable theory, and Morpheus tells him, this is the exact reason why I couldn't find it in my heart to punish you. But it is time you took up your actual role. And Gilbert tells Morpheus, it would be my honor. It was never my intention to abandon it. He then turns to Rose and says, after you die, if you stay in the dreaming, come visit me. Walk in my meadows, sit under my trees. And then he says goodbye. And all of a sudden, that winter setting that they're in completely changes to the most beautiful, serene-looking place. But now, unfortunately, it's time for Morpheus to have to do what he has to do. He's got to kill Rose. He gets ready to do so, but he's stopped by Lucienne and Unity, who is still holding the book that tells the story of her unlived life. And she found something really interesting in it. According to the book, she was supposed to be the vortex. But because he was in prison, that fate was handed down to her descendants, like Rose. So in reality, it should be Unity that has to die, and not Rose. Unity then looks at Rose and says, take the vortex out of your body. It's the dream world. You can do that. And Rose had never thought about it, but she's able to. She takes it out, Unity looks at it, and now she is the dream vortex. So Morpheus ends up killing her, but he only kills her in the real world. In the dream realm, it just looks like she got knocked out and doesn't really know where she is at the moment. Morpheus fills her in on the fact that she just died so Rose could live. And Rose feels really guilty about this, but as Unity tells her, I should have died a long time ago. But then again, if I had, I would have never met my golden-eyed man. And we would never have had our beautiful baby girl, which means that you wouldn't have been here. Morpheus stops her and says, wait, the father of your child had golden eyes? And Unity confirms it. And the thing is, Morpheus knows exactly who Unity's dream man was. It was Desire. Unity then turns to Rose, says her goodbyes, and assures her that her and Jed will be taken care of. Mr. Holdaway will make sure of it. Morpheus then tells Rose, you and your brother are children of the Endless. You may leave this place. Goodbye, Rose. And then Rose wakes up. She's kind of taking in everything that happened to her, but then she gets a text message from Lyda telling her that she had a healthy baby boy. So her and Jed head over to the hospital to meet him. And he doesn't have a name yet. I mean, Lyda did just become pregnant like a day ago. Rose then exits the room and gives the B&B an update on what's going on with Lyda, the baby, but mainly the fact that they're planning on flying back to New Jersey the next day. And that piques the interest of Hal, who says, how far is New Brunswick from New York? And it's only an hour. The dream of becoming a Broadway actor has bit him again, and he says aloud, maybe I'll just sell the B&B and move back. That's when Zelda tells him that they'll buy the house, and they'll take over the B&B. So a day later, Rose, Jed, Lyda, the baby, Hal, they all move back to New Brunswick together. And Rose took Hal's advice. She wrote a book called Into the Night, and she submitted it to a publisher. But little does she know that Into the Night will, in fact, be a published novel. It arrived in Lucienne's library. Lucienne, though, has to wait for Morpheus to get back, because after the revelation that Desire was the one who impregnated Unity Kincaid, he wants to have a word. He visits Desire and tells him Unity Kincaid should have been the vortex of this era. But someone took advantage of my imprisonment, and then that same person fathered a child with her, knowing full well that it would become the vortex, and I would be forced to kill a child of the Endless. It was an impressive plan, but Morpheus asked Desire, what did you exactly intend? I mean, you knew what would happen if I spilled family blood. And all Desire can say is, well, this time it almost worked. Morpheus then grabs Desire by the head and says, "Mess with me or mine again, and I shall forget your family. Do you believe that you're strong enough to stand against me?" And Desire just has to say, "No." Morpheus lets Desire go and says, "Remember that next time you're inspired to interfere in my affairs." But the bad blood between these two is not over. Morpheus then heads back to his realm and starts working on new nightmares, new dreams. And that's when he's visited by Lucienne, who gives him the update that Rose Walker's book arrived in her library. Lucienne then goes to walk away, but Dream says, "Wait, you don't want to say hello?" Because the dream that Morpheus is working on is Galt. Morpheus really listened to Lucienne this time, and he decided, you know what? People can change. So he decided to make Galt what she wanted to be, and that's a dream, not a nightmare. Morpheus tells both of them, "I had no right returning here after a century and expecting everything to be just as I left it. Lucienne tried to tell me that. I didn't want to listen, but I'm listening now." Galt then flies off, and Morpheus looks at Lucienne and says, "I might be here a while. Do you mind keeping tabs on everything while I work?" And Lucienne is more than happy to do that. But as Morpheus works on new nightmares and new dreams, over in hell, Lucifer gets told that Lord Azazel would like a word with her. Lord Azazel just looks like a rift with a bunch of demon faces in it. And he tells Lucifer, "I'm going to be brief. I'm here at the bidding of the assembled lords of hell. And we have a common enemy. It's Dream of the Endless. The armies of hell are yours to command should you wish to strike. And they would be more than willing to invade the dreaming if you command it. Maybe after that, the waking world and even Silver City. I mean, since none of us can leave hell, might as well expand its borders a bit. But don't just think about this. The generals demand action." Lucifer kind of finds that amusing and tells Azazel, "Well, then I shall act." Once Azazel leaves, Lucifer does say, he's not to be trusted, but he's not wrong. "I'm going to do something that I've never done before. Something that will make God absolutely livid and bring Morpheus to his knees." And that is the end of Season 1 of The Sandman. Thank you so much for getting this part of the recap. I really appreciate it. There's a link to my Patreon in the bio. If you click it and subscribe, you get stuff. There's also merch. You could do that too. Subscribe, like, dislike, thumbs up, thumbs down, comment, don't. But just know I appreciate you getting this far.